Okay, we're only going to do, I was kind of in a hard spot about what we need to do because the next chapter is David's prayer and it's long. And so I could just do these verses and then get halfway in this prayer, but I think I'm going to save that and just do it all at once. But in this little section, which is pretty easy to read, but there's a lot of questions here, we're probably going to have lots of discussion, I would imagine. So let's get into it. So, we've gone through 1 and 2 Samuel. We have now in 2 Samuel, we finished kind of the narrative arc of David's life, his rise, his fall, his restoration as king. All those things are done. And now in chapter 21 through 24, I've told you this a couple times. I'm going to kind of explain a little better tonight so that you understand. Chapters 21 through 24, we are given this thematically constructed epilogue, basically, of the narrative of David as the writer brings it to a close. The things in these last 4 chapters, and we looked at one of the events last week, they're not arranged in chronological order. They're kind of intentionally arranged, pointing at various times in David's reign, and they're arranged with a literary device called a chiasm. That probably don't mean much to you, so I found this slide that kind of really shows it. Can y'all read that? I didn't make this. Somebody else made it. But basically, a chiasm is kind of a mirrored structure. And so you have the top and the bottom, the beginning and end of these 4 chapters talk about sin, wrath, and atonement. We already looked at the last one. It was Saul's sin. David's trying to atone and get God's wrath off of the people. At the very end, we'll see David's sin when he makes a census that he's not supposed to do. At the beginning, we saw it was a famine that brought God's wrath came as a famine. At the end, it'll be a plague, and how David wrestles with sin and removal of wrath and atonement. The 2 middle sections, the 2 intersections, one we're going to look at tonight, are basically just the stories of David's mighty men. And we'll see why they're there tonight as we look at those. And in these chiastic structures, usually the middle section is the meat that explains the rest. It is what this is about. It's what everything points to. And those 2 middle sections are David's words, his song. And basically the point of all of these chapters is that God is the one who has delivered David through all of the things. So in the prayer, the song that we'll see, I think it's Psalm 18 and 2 Samuel 22 are the same. And so basically it's just this Psalm of David where he's just grateful to God for all of the victories and how God's delivered him through his enemies and all those things. And so what we see basically in the structure is we see David unable to get to atone for wrath without the suffering of God's people. We see David so weary that it's his mighty men that have to be brought up by God to have victory over his enemies. And then in the middle, we see David attributing all of his victory, all of his blessings to God alone. And so it just kind of cements in our mind at the end of 2 Samuel, David is not the king that brings the perfect fulfillment of God's kingdom, yet God's promises to David and God's promises through David do come to pass because God is faithful to bring deliverance. God is faithful to his word to David, despite all of his failures, despite all of those things. Y'all with me? Y'all understand that? Close enough? Okay. So the things in these last 4 chapters, we're going to go one by one, but I wanted you to know this kind of structure so you see that while we're looking just tonight at the second, 21, 15 through 21, the theme that interprets all of these is David's inner faith. His outer strength is failing. His outer righteousness has failed. We're going to see tonight that his physical strength has failed as he's weary, and these other guys, God uses the other guys to bring victory. But the inner man of David is faithful, trusting God, thanking God, gratifying God. So it's pretty applicable to us. God's anointed king, David, but not the fulfillment of God's perfect king, which would be the son of David. So last week in chapter 21, We looked at this, man, it was just a truly horrible story of David just being forced to deal with the previous sin of Saul. Remember what that sin was?
The group that he wasn't supposed to kill.
Yeah. Saul killed the Gibeonites who had made a covenant with Joshua, even deceptively, but God held them to that covenant. And I just told you who the Gibeonites were, so after a long time, we're not told, God brought this famine on the nation because of this. And how was the famine resolved? What did David do? Yeah. At the suggestion of the Gibeonites, David took 7 descendants of Saul and had them let the Gibeonites execute them before the Lord. So it wasn't revenge killing. It was an atonement before the Lord to turn away that wrath. And there was a question about when the wrath was actually turned away, but what actually happened was they were killed. The mom of 2 of those guys wept and mourned out there, and she stayed until the rains came, which signaled the end of the famine. And then David honored those 7 who were executed along with Jonathan and Saul, and took all of their bodies and their bones and buried them together in Kish's tomb. And it says, then God relented of the famine. Okay? Y'all with me? So David, so far in these last several chapters, we looked at a lot of things that he wasn't able to do. He's not a king who can appease God's wrath for sin without grief and suffering being laid upon the people. And we just added that to the list. That 2 Samuel told us of things David was unable to do. He couldn't unite the hearts of the nation. They were divided amongst themselves as David was coming back to the throne. He couldn't save his son from the consequences of his sin. He couldn't rescue the people from the suffering that his sin and Absalom's sin and Saul's sin had caused. And at the end of chapter 21, what we're going to look at tonight, after showing us David is not the king who can turn away God's wrath for his people, the author really gives us 4 snapshots of victories won by David's men because David was too weary, it says. And what we're going to see is that David's just a man like everybody else who is beset with weakness and weariness. And I think the author puts this list of victories right up next to the horrible atonement story that we just looked at, to show us that despite God's demands of holiness and the horrible nature of sin and the suffering that consequences sin brings, God continued to keep his promise to David, even when David himself was too weary to act. We're going to see that tonight. I think it was, I got the verse written in here somewhere, but I think it was in 2 Samuel at some point, chapter 3 maybe, where God made the promise that David would be the man who delivers my people from the Philistines. And here we see David is too weary to fight these battles, but God raises up men from David who will bring the victory. So ultimately it's God who does it. And David's going to verify all the things I just said to you in the song that he sings. God is the one who delivers. God is the one who gave him victory. God is the one who was with him over and over and over again. Okay, so let's read 15 through 22. And as we're reading, you're going to have a lot of questions. Just hold them until we ask for questions, because I'm going to try to address all the things, maybe. All right, here we go. There was war again between the Philistines and Israel. David went down together with his servants, and they fought against the Philistines, and David grew weary. I think that's really the mitigating phrase for why other guys are all listed here winning the battles. It says, and Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and who was armed with a new sword, fought to kill David. So David's weary. This big guy wants to come kill him. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, you shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. After this, that's snapshot number 1. Here's snapshot number 2. After this, there was again war with Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai, the Hushaite, struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. I know your translations probably say different things. We'll get to that. And then snapshot 3. And there was again war with Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of Jair or Regim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was, this is snapshot 4, and there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was a descendant from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These 4, the 4 snapshots, were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Okay? Should be pretty clear. We could probably not even explain it and just go on home. That's a joke. It's okay to laugh. Y'all stay with me here because it's going to be a long night. Okay? Now, if I were titling this section, and in fact I did title this section when you came in, I would say the title is, Despite David's weariness, God still keeps his word and delivers the Philistines into his hand. That's the basic. There's lots of peripheral questions that you have. I know your translations all say different things, but that's the point. So if you don't take anything else away from all this stuff, David is weary, he's weak. God raises up these men and God delivers David through them. Okay, so God's keeping his word even though David is weary. So we don't know exactly when these different battles happened during David's reign. The Philistine threat was in the background pretty much all through the books of Samuel. So it could have been at any point. Most likely, I think, this is my opinion because we're not given any time frame, I think it's going to be closer to the end of David's reign because that's when we see him weaker and dealing with the effects of sin and all the things that happened in his family. Before that, what we saw was David was just as mighty as they come. You know, he was going and getting it. You know, he was doing all the things. But because of his weariness here, it's probably closer to the end of his reign. So we have seen several ways in which David, God's king, is inadequate to bring the fullness of kingdom. Here, we see David's men defeating what the ESV calls 4 giants because David himself is too weary. So let's look at the first one, and then first we'll deal with the giant question because I know your translations probably say different things, and then we'll deal with the text, okay? Sound good? Okay, thank you for your affirmation. I appreciate it very much. All right, there was war again between the Philistines and Israel, and David went down together with his servants, and they fought against the Philistines. David grew weary. That's kind of the point. David grew weary, and this guy, Ishi-Banab, or whatever his name is, he's after David, and David's weary. The victories of all these men are set against David's weariness. And of course, already told you 3 times, God keeps his word and delivers David through these men. So, 16 through 17. Ishi-Banab, one of the descendants of the giants whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, armed with a new sword, he thought to kill David. So David is weary. David is the king. David is the guy with the target on his back. He's weary, and this big guy wants to kill him. It says, but Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid, attacked the Philistine, and killed him. And then David's men told him, you're not going to battle with us anymore. Now the ESV calls all of these guys in these 4 snapshots descendants of the giants. Anybody have a different rendering in your translation? Oh, come on. You definitely do.
It says
Rapha. The Rapha, yeah. Anybody else? And nobody has Rephaim?
No, just Rapha.
Okay. All right, so the word giants translated in ESV is the word Rapha. And there's a definite article there, so it's technically the Rapha. So there are some people that say Rapha is a personal, proper name, like it was the Rapha, which big guy. Some translations say the Rephaim, because those that are descended from the Rapha are the Rephaim. Ish-Banab is technically, the text says, one born of the Rapha. So some take this, like I said, to be a proper name. Others take it to be a group of people that are commonly called the Rephaim in Scripture. But what Rephaim means and what the Rapha means is highly debated. So it seems, and I'm going to give you a lot of opinion here, so you just take it for what it's worth. What it seems like to me in Scripture is that the Rephaim is used as more of a descriptor rather than a national or ethnic people group. So it is describing warriors who are unusually tall and big, and when the Hebrew text was translated into Greek, they translated the word Rapha, Rephaim, giants. And so the Jews who translated 200 BC, the Septuagint, surely believe that what we're talking about here is giants, because they use the words unequivocally giants in Greek. But people of large size are called by many names in the Bible. So the Moabites called them Emites. The Ammonites called them Zamzamites. And they were called sons of Anak by the Israelites of Joshua's day. So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 19 through 21, Moses has given them the last three speeches he gives in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is all of Moses' speeches before they go into the promised land. And it says, and when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, he's talking about Canaan, do not harass them, or not Canaan, excuse me. Do not harass them or contend with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot for possession. It is also counted as the land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites call them Zamzumim, a people great and mighty, as tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place. So it's giving us a little history lesson about the Rephaim. And so people of immense size are called several different things in the Old Testament. And when Joshua sent the 12 spies into the land, they came back with a bad report. And what did they say about the people there? Yeah, they were giants. We look like grasshoppers next to them. And they claimed in Numbers that the sons of Anak, the people that they claimed were big and they were grasshoppers, were descended from the Nephilim. Who are the Nephilim? Come on, I know you know that. Everybody knows the Nephilim.
Offspring of angels and women.
Yeah, some people say. I don't think so. But the offspring of angels and women in Genesis 6 is what most people, that's the going thing. So some take, here's your choices. I'll tell you what I think. You don't have to agree with me. I really don't care. Honestly, I don't. There's a lot of scholarly people who believe a lot of different things. Some take the Rephaim to be supernatural beings born of fallen angels and women, connecting them to the Nephilim in Genesis 6. Okay? And that's a perfectly orthodox view. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. But if you were here with us through Genesis 6, you already know that I don't hold that view. I think the sons of God and the daughters of men were the lines of Cain and the lines of Seth. And the reason I gave for that was if you pull the genealogy out of Genesis 5 and just put 4 and 6, the story, together, the last thing 4 says is, and then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And the next thing it says, and then when the sons of God went into the daughters of men. And so that's how we explain that. That's my view. You don't have to hold that view. It's not necessary. But even if you believe the Nephilim were offspring of angels and humans, and the Rephaim are also supernaturally, big giant people, if the Nephilim were supernatural giants, they all died in the flood. And so if they're still running around, they had to come from Noah's line. So there's a fox in the hen house somewhere. So in my opinion, this is my opinion, you don't have to hold it. Honestly. It's okay to hold a different view. These are just unusually tall and strong warriors that David's men defeated, just like David defeated Goliath. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. So John MacArthur, Alistair Begg, there's a litany of godly, way more scholarly people than me who believe that they are angels and men, and that's fine. No problem with that. But whether these warriors were simply just unusually tall carried just some legendary status, or they were supernatural, hybrid people. The text makes one thing unmistakable, and this is not my opinion. This is the text. David himself was too weary to face them. Yet God still handed every single one of them over to David through these other men. And I think that's the point. And David is going to make that point in his song and in his prayer when he said, it's God who delivered me from all of my enemies, and God who brought me through. The very poetic, very beautiful psalm. We'll get to it next week. So let's back up then and look at 15 again. War, David grew weary. That's the point. Point that it wasn't by David's hand that any of these powerful warriors were defeated. It was by, in this case, Abishai. Who is Abishai? Oh, come on. Who is Abishai? You know who Abishai is. Joab's brother. Abishai is, let me cut his head off guy. Remember? It's like he's wanting to cut everybody's heads off. Well, he finally gets the opportunity. And he was a mighty, mighty warrior. Defeated the giant, didn't he? So David's unable to do battle with Ishibi, this guy, and he's gunning for him. So the text simply says, and it's just so matter of fact, Abishai attacked him and he killed him. Period. End of story. It doesn't tell us anything about it. It just says, oh yeah, and Abishai killed this guy. When David's men see that David looks like he's missing a step, they take an oath that he isn't going to be doing the fighting from here on out. He is the lamp of Israel, the anointed of God. He is the touch point, the cornerstone, if you will, of the people of God. So here we see two things. First, the lamp of Israel is not sufficient in himself to win Israel's battles, but God is. He is capable and able to keep his promise, though David himself is weary. And the Lord who promised to give David victory over the Philistines was powerful enough to do it even though David wasn't. Despite his weakness, frailty at this point at least, and even his sin that we've talked about all through 2 Samuel, God's promise cannot be undone. Okay? You with me? That's not the hardest thing we're going to deal with tonight. The next snapshot. Any questions before we move on? Comments? You want to give your view on the giants? That's fine. Yes?
We could remember, if they had regular names instead of these crazy names, we could remember better.
Yeah. So if David's nephew was named like Jobab, we could remember that. Or Franklin, or
American names.
American names, yeah. And David said to his nephew John. Well, John's a Semitic name. So anyway, all right, verse 18. It says, after this there was war again, Philistines in Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushite struck down Saph, who was one of the sons of the giants. In this scene, David isn't even mentioned. In fact, the rest of them, David isn't mentioned. Another giant, another powerful warrior, a guy named Sibbecai kills him. If you were to turn to 1 Chronicles 27, we're told that Sibbecai is one of David's mighty men and the commander of one of his divisions. And it's the third snapshot where we're going to do most of our discussion, I would imagine. So let's just keep on going. It says, and there was again war with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of Jeraorjim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And everybody's question is, what's a weaver's beam? That's not the question I was expecting. I don't know what a weaver's beam is. I have no clue. Yeah. So, spear was like a weaver's beam. Goliath, whose spear was like Goliath the Gittite, whose spear was like a weaver's beam, is who? Yeah. Now, how many of y'all got NIV? Yours don't say that, does it? What does it say? Does it say that? No.
It says the brother
All
of
it just says is the
Yeah, see? NIV, so the ESV, New American Standard Bible, say, struck down Goliath the Gittite, shaft to whom like a weaver's beam. The NIV, the NET, says he struck down Goliath's brother. The brother of Goliath the Gittite, whose staff was like a weaver's beam. Okay. Without knowing any of the textual history, which one do you think's right?
I think they're wrong. It's just the one I.
Yeah, okay. Goliath's brother. Why do you think that? Yeah, already been. The writer of 2 Samuel, not an idiot. I mean, he wrote David killed Goliath. Okay, so let me tell you, there's a couple of different views on this, and I'm going to tell you the several views people hold, and then the right view. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just serious. It's okay. All right, so we know, contradicts what we've already seen. David's the one who killed Goliath, not Elhanan. Okay, so to get around this, some people have said Goliath is not actually a name, but a title for others of Gath. Possible, but I don't have any evidence for that. Others have said Elhanan is a name for David. And so he's basically just saying David killed Goliath. He's just reporting what had already happened. That's possible too. I'm sure that there's evidence somewhere, but I don't know where it is. The reason some of your translations say the brother of Goliath is because 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5, in the same context, the same list of battles, tells us, and there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, notice no Origim, no Bethlehemite, right? Doesn't say that. It says, struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, shafted whose spear was like a weaver beam. Now, how do you reconcile these two? I'm going to try to explain. Maybe I shouldn't. Sometimes I wrestled this week about should you even go into this? But this stuff, it's fun. I know, a lot of people, when I start talking about this kind of textual stuff, people's eyes glass over. I understand, but it's fun for me. So just give me a minute, okay? Let me have fun. But I want you to understand, because there are a lot of people who use apparent Bible contradictions to say that the Bible's not true, it's untrustworthy, all kind of different things. The truth of God's word has nothing to hide. Zero things to hide. And there are answers for everything. Answers aren't the be-all, end-all. Answers to questions don't get people into the kingdom. God's Spirit gets people into the kingdom through Jesus Christ. But it's important for us to know, it's important for me that we know not just what we believe, but why we believe it. Okay? So just, if I lose you, let's just talk about it. And I'll try to explain it the best I can. I believe the copyist, not the author, the copyist of the Masoretic text of 2 Samuel made a mistake. Now, when I say that, you think, whoa, Jason's a heretic, let's get a new pastor. I believe the Bible's inerrant. I believe it's infallible. But when you hear me say that, you start thinking, oh, he's saying that we can't trust what we read. That's not what I'm saying. When you examine the text, it's pretty easy to see why we can know for a fact what the true reading of this is. Okay? Let me show you this slide. I debated about whether to do this or not. You don't have to read it. Okay. You don't have to know what it says. I'm not going to try to explain. Okay. The first line is from 2 Samuel 21. And it says, it's the end of the little phrase that first, so it's right to left. We're reading it. So let me just click the next one. That yellow word is Bethlehemite. And that word next to it, 8, is a direct object marker. So it's a grammatical thing that's not translated into English. And then the last word is Goliath. Okay? So Elhanan, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath. Killed is up there, but the direct object marker tells us Goliath was the one he killed. Okay? You don't have to know all that grammar. The second one is 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5. And it doesn't say Bethlehemite in our English Bibles. It says Elhanan killed, the verb is at the beginning of the Hebrew sentence, killed, that middle word is Lami. And then that's the direct object marker, and that's Goliath. So it's Elhanan killed Lami, the brother of, that's brother. The word brother, Goliath. Okay, you with me? No, you're not with me. Let me do it again. First word's Bethlehemite at the top, direct object marker, Goliath. Elhanan, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath. Second one is First Chronicles, and it says Elhanan, that's the direct object marker, killed Lami, the brother of Goliath. Okay? Now, those two sentences look a whole lot alike, don't they?
Yeah.
Now imagine copying it with no spaces in the words, no vowel points, no eyeglasses, no electric lights, no ink pens, no nothing. You can see what happened, can't you? It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. Lami looks like, with the direct object marker, looks like Bethlehemite. And the direct object marker in the top sentence looks just like the word brother of, and Goliath looks just like Goliath because it's the same word. So you see what happened? It's not a conspiracy. It's not a corruption. And the reason why, yes.
Did Goliath only have one brother?
Maybe, I don't know, but he's the only brother mentioned here in chapter 21. So the problem with the problem we're facing here is it doesn't say, 2 Samuel says he killed Goliath. But the reality is he killed Goliath's brother. And it's a textual variant. Now, if you were here in Acts, when we looked at Acts 8:37, I did a whole sermon on Acts 8:37, which is a verse that we talked about not being in the earliest manuscripts. And I took you, remember the staff calls it the John Madden sermon, where I was writing on the deal. A lot of y'all remember that when we were going through it. When you see a textual variant, or when we come across textual variants, or when we see notes that say the earliest manuscripts don't contain this, we're going to see a big one at the end of Mark. And I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you this whole presentation that I did in Acts again and show you how we got our Bible and show you how these things do not affect inerrancy or trustworthiness or historicity or any of those things. When you go and I'm going to give you the short version. When you go and you pick up one of these from the store, you are not getting the end result of a long line of a single transmission where Joe copied Frank's copy and Frank copied John's copy and his copy. What you are getting is the study of all of the manuscript tradition synthesized to show us what the original readings were. So think of it this way. If I asked everybody in this room to copy the Gospel of John, and I got all of your copies together, and I looked at them all, there would be scribal mistakes in all of them. I made a mistake. I have a whiteboard I write the text on every week, and I made a mistake on the whiteboard because the one line looked like the next line. I just skipped over it when my eyes went back. It happens. But the mistake that you make in your copy is not the same mistake that everybody else makes. And if you made a mistake in your copy that 35 other people didn't make, we know that you made a mistake and that the rest of these are the original reading. And so when you pick up a Bible, it's not just the end result of a telephone game, as if, this guy copied it and he made some mistakes, and this guy copied it and he made mistakes, and he copied his mistakes. That's not how we got our Bible. That's not what you're reading when you're reading the Bible. We have a transmission history that is filled with not a single line, but a tree branch of all of these different manuscript traditions. And we take all of those things, and we line them up against each other, and we examine them, and we can get back to the original reading. So when we find something like this, we know where it is. There was no corruption, no textual variant, purposeful or accidental, that we don't know where it's at, because all of the manuscript tradition has been preserved through time. Any questions? That's not a very good explanation. I can tell by your faces. Y'all not with me. Yes.
So, I understand what you're saying. And
Do you?
I do. I wish everyone could. So, I went to a conference at Midwestern, and they explained this. Not this exact text, but there's another text. And like you said, the scribes are going along, and if they made a mistake, it's not like they can erase it and peel another skin off an animal and keep going. This particular passage is known in some of the manuscripts. The scribes would literally go to a margin. They would do a special notate. They'd go to the margin
I wish I had something for a visual aid. Now I'm thinking I should have never brought none of this up and just let y'all, yeah, ignorance is bliss. We should have just went on. Yeah, it's just Goliath. Don't worry about it. All right, think of it this way. What most people will tell you that deny Scripture's inerrancy and infallibility because of corruption will say that the way we got our Bible, when you pick up your Bible in the store, what you're reading is the end result of a single line. So how many of y'all played the telephone game before? Whisper something in somebody's ear, then they whisper it in another one, they whisper it in another one, and by the time you get to the end of the line, it's way different than what you started with. That's not what you're reading when you pick up a Bible in the store. What you are reading is the combined study of all of the manuscript traditions. So we have thousands of Hebrew manuscripts. We have over 6,000 these days of Greek manuscripts. And we have manuscripts all through the timeline, not just the end result. We have them all through the timeline. And so if this scribe, there's one manuscript called Codex Bezae, which has all kind of crazy stuff in it. We know it's crazy because all of the other manuscript traditions don't contain it. So by comparing all of these things together, you can get back to the original reading. And what I make sure to tell people is, and I had a when we did this in Acts, and I'm going to do it again in Mark when we get there. I have a Greek Bible in my office I bought from Amazon. You can get, it's $60 from Amazon, and at the bottom it has a apparatus that tells you all of the manuscripts that these variations are found in. So I'm not even beholden to some ivory tower scholar that I ain't never met and I don't know to make a decision about what the original text read. I can see the manuscripts it's in. I have a chart in the back that tells me what date it's from and all those things. And so we have all of this information. It's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy. It's not something ivory tower scholars only have, and we're just trusting they made the right decisions to put it in our Bible. We have all of the information. It's not hidden. And we have what we have in the Scriptures is absolutely 100% inerrant and trustworthy. The doctrine of inerrancy and the doctrine of inspiration is about the autographs, the original readings. And so all of the translations, all of the transmissions, all of the manuscripts, all of those are studied to show us what the original reading was. Okay? Yes?
Was Goliath ever referred to as a Gittite before?
I think so. Back in, somebody can look it up. Didn't find it in...
Like the Philistine and from Gath.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was a different Goliath.
I don't know. But it says it's from Gath and the Philistine.
Yeah, but it didn't say he was a Gittite when David killed him? Interesting. Well, I just wasted 10 minutes of your time. Yeah. Huh? A Gittite means they're from Gath? Oh, well, there you go. Any other questions? I feel like I should have had more slides. I should have anticipated the inerrancy question and come with better visual aids.
Did a good job.
Don't be lying. God killed 2 people for lying in church.
Not lying. Good job.
When we get to the end of Mark, which most of your Bibles will have the end of Mark in brackets, the last part of the last chapter in brackets, and it'll say most early manuscripts don't contain this. We're going to stop and we're going to do the exact same thing we did with Acts 8:37, and I'm going to go through the whole thing, and I'll have my whole presentation up here to show you why we know for a fact that we can trust the Bible. Even though we study these different manuscripts and these textual variations that are among manuscripts, it's pretty fascinating to me, and it's pretty fun. And I know it's not fun for most people, but I appreciate y'all letting me have fun, at least pretending like I'm explaining it well. No questions? Praise God. The last snapshot is very, very weird. There's again war in Gath where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. He's also descended from the giants, from the Rapha. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. So the author makes, fourth unnamed guy, descended from the Rapha, same. But this guy's got 24 digits. My name is Inigo Montoya. Some of y'all got that, right? But this giant taunted Israel. Same word that's used of Goliath back when David killed him. Same picture in mind. A giant taunting the people of Israel. And just like Goliath, his taunts are silenced. But this time, not by David, who is weary, but by one of David's nephews. So, despite all of the hubbub about all the questions that I probably shouldn't even have brought up about Goliath and the giants and all this stuff, the main point, go back to it, David is weary. He's unable to win the victory for his people. But God brought victory through, in this case, his nephew. David earlier, by God's power, slew the giant that taunted Israel. Now David is weary, and God raises up his nephew to do the same. So, last thing in verse 22, it says, these 4, talking about the 4 snapshots, were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David. Wait a minute. David wasn't involved in none of them. Fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. I think that's the point. Beginning, David's weary. Can't do it. Ishbi is going to kill him if Abishai doesn't step in. And then all these others. And now the victory is attributed to David. And the very next thing we're going to read in the next chapter is David attributes the victory to God. The author, David's going to make this abundantly clear. In 2 Samuel chapter 3, I want to say verse 18, God said, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines. And God has kept his promise, though David was too weary to raise his hand against these mighty giant Philistines. So this brief hero report basically just testifies to God's faithfulness to his word, even though David himself was not sufficient to accomplish these things. God said, I will save my people Israel by the hand of David from the Philistines. And here we see, though David is weary and didn't raise his sword in any of these battles with these giants, we still are told they fell by the hand of David because God brought victory according to his word. All this points to our covenant king, who is strong and mighty and not weary, who doesn't get weary, who doesn't sin, who doesn't fail in his righteousness, who is able to turn the Father's wrath away without the suffering of the people, and who himself gives victory, just as the Lord promised that he would. Everything in this epilogue really points us away from David and to the king who is to come. And just as God upheld his promise to David, the promise of the coming son of David is just as trustworthy. God will bring it to pass despite our weariness, despite our faithlessness, despite our sinfulness and lack of righteousness. God will not go back upon his promise. There are times many of us probably feel weary, unable to do what God has called us to do. Times when we're too tired to swing the sword, so to speak, or too worn out to lead your family well in certain circumstances, too weary even to pray, as we saw the disciples in the garden. The good news of this passage is that the victory was never supposed to depend on the strong strength of David. The same God who raised up Abishai, Sibbecai, Elhanan, and Jonathan for David, for the promise to be fulfilled to David, has raised up the true champion, Jesus, for the promise to be fulfilled for you. He is the never-weary king who has already defeated every giant that threatens you. Any questions, comments? Yes?
Is there, or maybe your thoughts or symmetry on David defeating Goliath for Saul when David was weak, and he's seen as weak as a shepherd boy, and now he's the king, but he's weak, and his nephew has to beat the Philistines for him, and then God is glorified in both scenarios.
I had not thought about that. I have not thought about that, but off the top of my head, that makes good sense. I mean, you think about it. So what Greg said was, is there any connection to, thematically, it would seem there would be, but any connection to Saul is the king, the mighty king, and this little shepherd boy, David, God raises him up to slay the giant. And now we have David as the weary and sin-stained king, although he has been forgiven. And God raising up David's nephew to kill the taunting giant like Goliath taunted. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes sense. It makes sense that, God raised up David to keep his word to Israel. God raised up his nephew to keep his word to David. And that word to David is the promise of his kingdom, his lineage, and ultimately a son that would come that would bring the eternal kingdom. So yeah, I think that's compelling.
Well, at the end, like God still shows him that he's glorified, and David recognizes that.
Yeah.
After everything he's done throughout his whole life, God is...
For sure. I think that's the kind of the point of these last 4 chapters, because, I mean, just to be honest, David is just this shining white knight all the way up until Bathsheba and Uriah, and then, quite frankly, every time we come here, we talk about how terrible David is. He's either unable to do this, or he's weak, or he makes the wrong decision, or he's passive, and it's just like this sin has just, the guilt of it has been wiped away. Nathan said, God has forgiven you of this sin, but it's like the consequences of it just followed him to the point where he's just a beaten, broken man, it seems. And even here in these final 4 chapters surrounding the deal. So the first chapter, he can't get the wrath of God off without the suffering of all these people. The last chapter, he messes up again, does a census that's going to bring a plague on the people. And then you have these two lists of mighty men who are winning these victories for him because he's too weary to do so. And right in the middle, in all of this negative that we see of David, not just sinful negative, but just inability. He's a man. He's weak. He's weary. He's all of these things. You see David's heart, his inner self, in this huge, long psalm that he sings in the next chapter about how God is the one who has done all this. God is the one who has brought me victory. He's delivered me from my enemies when I was at, death's door. And I mean, it's very poetic. It's very beautiful. In fact, I don't know. We're going to have to zip through it next Wednesday to get through the whole thing. It's like 50 verses. That's the point. I think the author at the end of David's story, which ends tragically because David is not the man to bring the kingdom, the author puts these 4 chapters together in this thematic way to show us on either side of David's inability, there's this center of him that is trusting the Lord and grateful to the Lord and praising the Lord and giving God all the glory for all the things that David has experienced in his life. And it's a good way to end the narrative of 2 Samuel. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, anything y'all want to say? Okay, let's pray. God, we love you. God, I pray that you would I pray that you just use the text that we have read. Your word won't return void. So even if there's a little bit of confusion about explanations on secondary questions about things, God, I pray that you would take the main point of the author, that you are the one who brings the victory. You are the one who holds fast to your promise, even when we're weak and we're weary and we're faithless sometimes. You are the God who does not change and who does not grow weary. You are the God who cannot lie and has given us your word through your Son, Jesus Christ, that our salvation, our deliverance, our victory, our peace, our righteousness, our relationship with you rests on eternally solid ground because of Jesus, who has given all. God, I thank you for the faithfulness of your promises, and I pray that you would help us, even in our weariness and our weakness, to hold fast to them, for it is the solid ground beneath our feet. God, we thank you. We do love you. In Jesus'